You feel it too, don't you? That gnawing sense that something is fundamentally broken. The economy doesn't make sense anymore. We just revised the job numbers again, and turns out we had 900,000 fewer jobs than we were told. The stock market keeps climbing while your grocery bill doubles. People around you are angrier, more divided than you've ever seen. Every morning you wake up to news that feels like another nail in the coffin. And here's the thing, this isn't random. There's actually a name for what we're living through. Some call it the fourth turning. Others say it's the decline of the American empire. But whatever label you put on it, we all feel it in our bones. Let me show you what's really happening behind the scenes. We've built a system designed to extract one thing from you, your attention. It's called the algorithm, and it's everywhere. Your news feed, your TV, your social media, it's all running on the same formula. And here's what the data discovered. Fear and anger are the two most effective ways to get you to click, to engage, to stay glued to the screen. Take a look at the numbers. Since 2010, media companies increased their use of divisive words by over 500%. Words like triggering, hurtful, mansplaining, they exploded in usage. Now ask yourself, did society suddenly become 500% more divisive? Or did companies realize that picking sides, creating enemies, and feeding outrage is what sells subscriptions? Being neutral doesn't pay the bills. Controversy does. Think of it like this. You know that old tune, shave and a haircut, 2 bits? But I stop right before the end. It's incomplete. It's triggering. That's modern journalism. It's designed to bait you, to leave you hanging, to make you come back for more. And it works because fear and anger are primal. They're in our DNA. We need to know about threats so we can avoid them. The algorithm learned this, and now it's weaponized against us. This isn't journalism anymore. It's a perversion of economic incentives. But here's the thing, none of this psychological manipulation would work if the second piece wasn't missing. And that piece is economic stability. Let's talk about what's really happening to your wallet. When your parents were starting out, the average home cost about 3 times the average income. Today, it's 7 times. The average age of a first-time homebuyer used to be in the 20s. Now it's 38. Rents have skyrocketed even when you adjust for inflation. We've created an entire generation of renters instead of owners. And when people don't own anything, when they have no stake in society, no property, no assets, why would they defend it? What are they protecting? Here's how distorted things have become. Over half of people using buy now, pay later services have missed payments. We're talking about people buying pizza on credit and defaulting. That's not normal economic behavior. That's desperation dressed up as convenience. And while this is happening, the wealth gap keeps growing. The top 1% now holds more wealth than America's entire working class. Young people look at the future and see no path to homeownership, no way to build wealth, no stability. So you get a society primed for radicalization. Because when people believe they've got nothing to lose, that's when societies hit breaking points. That's when empires fall. If this all sounds familiar, it should. We've seen this movie before. Let's go back about 2,000 years to Rome. After decades of military conflict and wealth inequality that collapsed the Roman Republic, Emperor Augustus ushered in an era of peace and prosperity. He redistributed wealth, bought land for veterans, increased taxes on elites to fund pensions, employed tens of thousands to transform Rome from brick to marble. He provided grain to millions of families, prosperity through long-term investment and public stability. Sound like a good plan? It was, until it wasn't. After a catastrophic military defeat, cracks started forming. Following Augustus, Emperor Tiberius decided to cut government spending despite the economy depending on it. Inequality exploded, unemployment surged, infrastructure crumbled. Then he made a critical mistake. He demanded creditors invest heavily in Italian land. Credit surged, interest rates spiked, real estate bubble inflated, and boom, Rome's housing market collapsed. Sound familiar yet? Banks defaulted, wealthy families were ruined, trade paralyzed, unemployment skyrocketed. Tiberius had to bail out the banks and elite creditors with a massive no-interest loan. The cost of concentrated wealth and over-leveraged economies fell on the public. Just like 2008. Just like now. Rome recovered, but something changed. The centuries that followed were plagued by excessive spending, corrupt leaders, currency debasement, outsourced labor, endless wars, and wealth inequality. The moral fabric slowly eroded, and whenever there was economic collapse or civil war, a new leader would emerge promising to restore Rome to its former greatness. Emperor Severus even minted coins saying, "Restorer of the city," while he was actively devaluing Rome's currency and accelerating inflation. The Roman poet Juvenal captured it perfectly. The mob that used to grant power, high office, the legions, everything, now curtails its desires and reveals its anxieties for just two things: bread and circuses. Bi choshi si, give people food and entertainment, and they'll never revolt. Every bailout, every short-term fix, every political savior just pushed the empire further down a path it could never return from. Rome believed each crisis was temporary. They were wrong. The decline was structural, inevitable, and it's a pattern that re-emerged in the rise of the United States. After World War II, America became the world's superpower. Our industrial investments and being the only major power not forced to rebuild created immense prosperity. But then we developed an appetite for endless war and control. We started making the same mistakes as the British Empire. Britain was the first nation to industrialize at massive scale in the 18th century. They produced 2/3 of the world's coal, half its iron, 40% of its steel. They used this dominance to build a global network. But here's where they went wrong. Between 1865 and 1914, British investors poured as much money into Africa, Asia, and Latin America as they did into Britain itself. Overseas ventures delivered higher returns than domestic ones. The elite profited immensely, while the working class experienced zero upward mobility. Economists estimated that redirecting even a fraction of foreign investment back into domestic manufacturing could have increased Britain's national income by 25 to 50%. Instead, local industries decayed, wages stagnated, and working-class neighborhoods fell into long-term decline. America watched this happen and then did the exact same thing. After World War II, we redirected billions to rebuild Japan to contain communism. We reduced tariffs on Chinese imports. We incentivized companies to source overseas. We told ourselves American jobs weren't foundational assets but disposable costs to minimize. Let's talk about what that looked like in real terms. Detroit used to produce over 60% of the world's automobiles. Pennsylvania mills outproduced Germany and Japan combined. Blue-collar labor powered the economy and built American infrastructure. Then came the outsourcing. In the 1990s under President Clinton, trade agreements like NAFTA and permanent trade relations with China opened our markets to aggressive import competition. Between 1994 and 2001, over 879,000 American jobs were officially certified as lost to direct trade competition. Some economists say the real number was 2 to 3 times higher. Detroit fell from one of the wealthiest cities in the world to one of the poorest in America with a 31.5% poverty rate. And where did those jobs go? China. Today, China accounts for 35% of global manufacturing. That's more than the next 9 largest manufacturers combined. We handed them industrial dominance while our infrastructure crumbles. According to the 2025 infrastructure report, America faces a $3.7 trillion shortfall by 2030. If you include dams, schools, and waste systems, that number rises to $4.4 trillion. We're trying to reignite manufacturing, but we're doing it on top of a corporate system designed for short-term efficiency at the lowest cost. We face 2 million unfilled manufacturing jobs by 2030. That could cost us $1 trillion annually. We abandoned the working class, and now we're paying the price. Now let's zoom out and look at the structural forces driving this collapse. One of the world's top economists, Dr. Wim Naudet, identified 7 sources of rot that destroyed the Soviet Union and are now manifesting in America. First, the military-industrial complex. We're spending ourselves into oblivion on defense while our domestic infrastructure crumbles. Just like late-stage Rome, just like the USSR. Second, rejection of science. We're politicizing research, attacking expertise, and undermining institutions exactly when we need them most. Third, disincentivizing innovation. Our economy favors incumbent monopolies over new industries. Real entrepreneurship is dying. Fourth, technological conservatism. We're clinging to outdated systems, subsidizing coal and oil while defunding clean energy research. Fifth, Informational breakdown. We live in echo chambers where no one agrees on basic facts. Social media algorithms feed us whatever confirms our biases. Sixth, financialization. Wealth flows into speculative finance instead of productive investment. We're living off debt instead of building real value. And seventh, fossil fuel dependence. We're doubling down on an energy system that's both economically and ecologically unsustainable, while the rest of the world moves to renewables. Every single one of these factors is a symptom of a system in terminal decline, and they're all accelerating right now. Here's what makes this moment so significant. In the year 2000, a sociologist named Johann Galtung predicted the United States would begin its collapse in 2025. He used the same framework that predicted the fall of the Soviet Union. Ray Dalio, one of the world's most respected economists, calls it the long-term debt cycle. Historians call it the fourth turning. Every 20 years or so, we enter a new phase. Great nations rise, prosper, overextend, and decline. And the decline always looks the same. Debt explodes, wealth inequality widens, politics turn bitter, trust in institutions collapses. We've seen it with Rome, with Britain, with the Soviet Union. And now we're seeing it with America. The pattern is unmistakable. National debt keeps climbing. Interest payments on that debt now exceed what we spend on the entire defense budget. The dollar's reserve currency status weakens every year, and domestically, we're more divided than ever. Data shows Democrats and Republicans have never been farther apart. In the 1960s, about half of both parties said they wouldn't mind their child marrying across party lines. Today, only 4% marry across party lines. We've made enemies of our neighbors. There's no more discourse, no conversation, and the algorithms keep feeding us divisive content, picking our story, sending us down rabbit holes. Left versus right, immigrants versus citizens, deep state versus patriots. Pick your narrative. The algorithm will poison you with it. I know this all sounds dark. It is dark. But here's the thing history shows us. Societies go through these cycles every generation, and every time it feels like the world is ending. But life goes on. I recently had dinner with friends and asked them, "Do you feel like the world is about to end?" They said, "Nah, that's just your algorithm. That's your bubble." And I hope they're right. But if this is really happening, if we're truly in a fourth turning moment, then we have a choice. We can descend into what some call economic nihilism, that feeling of, why try if nothing matters? That's dangerous because once a generation stops believing in a better future, they start looking for ways to tear the system down. Or we can go back to basics. Build real things, own real assets, invest in family and community, focus on what we can actually control. Here's what we've forgotten. What actually made America great wasn't politicians or slogans. It was everyday Americans who chose to stand up for what they believed was right, not through violence, but through unity, pursuing hope rather than hate. It wasn't elected officials who ended workers living in slums. It was Jacob Riis, a photographer who exposed tenement housing horrors in How the Other Half Lives, prompting New York to pass housing reform in 1890. The promise of draining the swamp wasn't fulfilled by politicians. It was Lincoln Steffens, a journalist who exposed municipal corruption, launching a national muckraking movement in 1902. You were able to have a childhood not because industry found empathy. It was because of Carmela Teoli, a 13-year-old girl who, despite having her scalp torn off in a cotton machine, testified before Helen Taft and ignited child labor reform in 1912. The mayor may live on as a global shell company, but for it to actually become great again, it must be rebuilt in service of future generations. We need to find hope in one another and use whatever strength we have left to redefine what it truly means to be an American. So here's my ask. As I continuously choose to show up, to do the research, to film these videos, to put my best foot forward, I'm asking you to do the same. Put responsibility and accountability on yourself. If you have a gift to write and you want to see a better tomorrow, then write. If you can speak, speak. If you can entertain, entertain. If you're creative, create. If you can build businesses, build them. And if you don't have those gifts, then offer whatever you can to those who do. You're equally important. There's no hierarchy here. Even if you're doing the absolute best you can and it still feels like it's not enough, it is enough. Of incentives and economics. And as President Kennedy once said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world.